All right, guys, welcome back. This is Norval Central coming back at you with another YouTube video, and I really do appreciate all the love and the support so far. I really appreciate all of that on my videos that I've had so far. It's been a great time, having a blast coming all the way back. Had a couple videos out so far, so be sure to go check those videos out. But let's go ahead and get straight into the video. So, really, the first thing I want to talk about is Tony White. He is an assistant coach for Florida State that has gotten a lot of criticism. He's a defense coordinator. He runs a 3-3-5 defense. And it seems like after that Alabama game, where Florida State was really being the most dominant team in the whole game, you even had Earl Little Jr., who was playing that rover position and having those guys that were being super aggressive. I understand with that. I understand the frustrations because it seems like after those first three games where we were able to win against Kent State and also East Texas A&M, you're having that 3-0 start and then you kind of play like crap against Virginia. He had the UCLA rumors coming through where he was wanting to be a head coach and it was his alma mater. I just wonder what it was going to be like for Florida State to finish the rest of the year with that defensive staff because you look at it. I think Florida State's got some good pieces this year too. I do think that even though they did finish top 30 in the defense of categories last year, I do think there is an opportunity for having a little bit more growth. You look last year with Jaden Baugh, the running back over at Florida, had 222 rushing yards last year, and it was basically an embarrassing performance for this defense. Now, the biggest factor I think in all of this, how Florida State is going to be able to rebound in 2026, not in terms of the yardage or perspective or anything. They're going to force more turnovers. They're going to be able to have more sacks. And I think it all starts with Mandrell Desir and also Daryl Desir. I think those are your two guys that you're looking at. You brought them over and being able to make them off of the transfer portal and giving them an opportunity to be able to have a more meaningful role. Now, Daryl obviously didn't have the exact season that Mandrell had because he was a freshman All-American. Everyone wanted to talk about the guy that had 6.5 sacks and 5 sacks in 6 games. So you just look at the other things as factors in as well. You got Rylan Kennedy, who come in from Texas A&M, only had 2.5 sacks last year, but everyone's talking about him just scratching the surface. That's a lot of what ifs on the defense line, but you do have a guarantee of what you know what to expect. You look at a guy like Daniel Lyons, who's been a veteran in this defense for quite some time, redshirt senior, has never transferred out of Florida State, and he's a Nole, as he said before. So I do think there's a couple of guys there that you have to kind of rely on. Even a Kevin Wynn, who played for 4 games last year and got injured. Diamante Diggs is another guy who Mike Norvell talks about as a huge defender for this defense. I think there's going to have to be a lot of pieces in that defensive line to start off with, and they're going to be the focal point of what Florida State needs to kind of take over for the defensive line. Now, obviously, Tony White went to more of a four-man defensive front at the very end of the year, specifically around the Virginia Tech game, and you saw a lot of success. But the problem is, you see guys like Baugh just coming straight up the middle, and there's not really much you can do with this defense. Now, the other thing is, too, you had the linebacker position that really wasn't showing much potential. Now, you had Blake Nicholson, who I think is solid. He's a senior coming in this year, and, hopefully he can have something there, but he only had 42 tackles last year. You brought in a guy like Chris Jones, who had over 100 tackles last year, was actually signed with Ole Miss. He actually backed out of his NIL, and then he was able to come to Florida State. Even Gaber from Nebraska also as well. I know he went to North Carolina for a little short stint there, but has a lot of good relationships with the staff. But you saw what Stephon Thompson last year. He didn't really emerge himself until later in the year. Omar Graham, it seemed like we talk about every year about Omar Graham, and I think this could finally be the year for him. But again, he's a senior. He has to do something this year. We have to get it done. And he had a very productive high school season. He had over 200 tackles in a senior season at Stranahan. I just wonder what's going to happen with him because you need a lot of factors that go into the linebacker position. I think Ernie Sims is going to have to make ends meet with that. Even a Chris Thomas, who they brought in from the JUCO ranks, I know he has a lower body injury, but I wonder what's going to factor into all of that. Then you go to the defensive backfield room. Patrick Surtain was a guy that they let go in the offseason, and a lot of fans and players and everything like that, they were all very disappointed in the result of that because they thought it was built a great relationship with Surtain. But I do think that there is some exciting pieces on this defense. You look at a guy that I don't think is getting quite much the respect that he probably needs is Mekhi Jones. He's actually a defensive back from Duke, and he had a great sophomore season, 42 tackles, kind of emerged on a little bit later in the season. And I do think he can be a guy and a focal point for Florida State going forward there. You also look at Jabril Rawls, a guy from Pensacola, three-star prospect. The biggest factor with him, though, is injuries. He's got to stay away from the injury bug. You also got a guy like Nehemiah Chandler, who's also around the Tallahassee area from there, but he did come from South Alabama. So obviously, going from a group of five to a power five is going to be a big struggle and a big factor in what Florida State does this year. Carson Hobbs is another guy they like. Quindarius Jones, who I talked about in an earlier video about being an underrated player, he's in his senior year. He's got to get it done. This has got to be the opportunity for him. But I do think this player that I'm about to mention is probably one of the more biggest reasons why I think Florida State's defense is going to be the way it is, and it's going to be Ashland Barker. I think this is a guy at the rover position. He's taken over for Earl Little Jr., who had that role last year. Obviously, Little Jr. did have a couple of different factors in this game because you saw how productive he was in certain games, specifically the Alabama game. I do think that there is going to be some opportunities for Barker to stay there. But the other thing is too, he has that antics on social media where he had a couple of comments that probably weren't the most pleasing in terms of that. But he's a young college kid. You expect some of that. And you want to make sure that you get the most out of your leader. And I do think that he's going to be a leader of this defense, and it's going to be a big factor as to why Tony White's defense is going to improve in 2026. But it all starts early on. You got to get through New Mexico State, you got to get through SMU, and then you got to get through Alabama. And obviously, I did mention that the Alabama game was basically meaningless, I guess you could say, in terms of making sure that the ACC contest are what you're mainly just trying to focus on. But I do think that Florida State can be able to have a productive season if some of those pieces really do step up. Now, obviously, if the Desir twins have like 10 sacks or 11 sacks, that's going to be fantastic for them. Ryland Kennedy can have a great year, and then you got pressure up the edge or up the middle with, Jordan Sanders and Kevin Wynn and Daniel Lyons. There's a lot of kids there that I think can be very productive in this Florida State defense. I know a lot of factors are going into it. A lot of people are talking about the offensive game. Ashton Daniels comes to mind at the quarterback position, and then you got a guy like Deuce Robinson who's very productive. Trey Wisner, Usman Kroma, Devin Carter is a young freshman that's going to be very good for Florida State. I just think the offense is getting a lot of love and a lot of discussion, but the defense isn't quite getting the love that it deserves. But I do think, generally speaking, in terms of the defensive improvements from year one to year two, specifically even in Nebraska, where they were able to finish in the top 25 after they had a lackluster first year, a lot of these guys are trying to figure out what is going to go on with this defensive scheme. How are they going to be able to factor into what Coach White is going to be asking them for? And I think there's going to be a lot of factors that go into it. But I think improved linebacker play, improved defensive lineman play. Now, I know that's going to be a factor that goes into it because you had a guy like Daryl Jackson. You can't just replace 6'5", 337 pounds. You have to find ways to be effective. Obviously, you didn't have the pass rushing techniques that you wanted from James Williams, who you thought was going to be very high on what Florida State brought to the table. But they did add a defensive lineman in this 26 recruiting class, so you want to see some of those freshmen be able to step up, specifically a guy like Jalen Anderson, who's a JUCO guy that they brought in. And I do think that he can be a factor in what they do in this defense, but you got to have some other guys there step up. Linebacker position is probably going to be better. I mean, just based off of Chris Jones alone. I mean, he had 100 tackles last year. You want to see more production. Defensive backfield, we'll see. We'll see if it's just going to be a neutral cause there. But I do think if you get Jabril Rawls is healthy, man, that would be a scary duo with him and Barker, and then also other guys too. But I really do think that this defense can be successful, and I think fan base really needs to learn about this defense and really factoring into what this defense can be as a whole. But I think they can really lead Florida State to some monumental victories, specifically on the road. They have to get the job done. Put your offense in the best possible circumstance that you possibly can with sacks, turnovers, forcing teams to punt and get you good short field position can be great for this defense and this offense going forward. But let me know who some of your guys that you're looking out for in this defense and what you think Florida State's defense can do in 2026. I know a lot of fans are kind of down on this defense, but I actually am quite confident in this defense and how they can be. Obviously, you're going to have that middle stretch where you have Louisville, Miami, and then Clemson. That's going to be a big factor in what Florida State does this year, but I do think this defense can be productive in what they're asked to do. But I hope each and every one of you have a great rest of the day as we get closer and closer to 4th of July. I'm going to have many more content every single day as we go through around this time. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to turn the bell on for notifications, like the video, and just let's talk about Florida State in the comments. And as always, go Noles.